You are about to experience Jackson Snyder Presents. Direct from the Vero Essene Yahad, a Hebrew Nation radio original program. JSP is a variety show seeking out Jewish and Christian origins, religion, theology and history, and doing so in a fashion that is both educational and entertaining. Welcome to Jackson Snyder Presents.
I am so happy to present to you part 2 of the quest for the historical Yochanan bar Zavdai, John son of Zebedee, from the scholarly paper The Enigma of the Beloved Disciple by John Martinez. While in exile at Patmos, John was informed of Antipas' martyrdom, Revelation 2:13, Arethusa, around 540, and Andreas, around 500, Greek commentators on the Apocalypse had read the acts of the martyrdom of Antipas, and summarized by Simeon Metaphrastes, that Antipas was shut up in a red-hot brazen bull in the temple of Artemis by order of the governor, and ended his life in thanksgivings and prayers. The bull itself was moved to Constantinople, where it could still be seen in the time of Cydranus, who was an 11th century Byzantine historian. In contrast to Nicholas, the deacon betrayer, Orthodox tradition has it that Prochorus, the faithful deacon of Acts 6:5, transcribed the Apocalypse as John dictated. Clement of Alexandria informs us, and I quote, "For when, on the tyrant's death, he returned to Ephesus from the Isle of Patmos, he went away, being invited to the contiguous territories of the nations, here to appoint bishops, there to set in order whole churches, there to ordain such as were marked out by the Spirit." That's from Quis Divus Salvator. This is the same activity of John bar Zebedee described in the Apostolic Constitutions, specifically in regard to ordaining Gaius in Antipas' place. How then are we to explain the testimony of Irenaeus, the disciple of Polycarp, disciple of St. John, and repeated by most church fathers? And I quote, "For that is the revelation, was seen no very long time since, but almost in our day, toward the end of Domitian's reign," which was about AD 96. Again, that's a quote from Irenaeus. Modern Bible scholar E.L. Martin has noted, and I quote, "The Apostle John actually saw the visionary events recorded in the book of Revelation on 2 different occasions. The first time he saw the revelation was about 56 AD, during Nero's reign, and the last time he witnessed it was in the time of Domitian in 96 AD. It's even attested in the book of Revelation itself that John would be given the contents of the little scroll on 2 different occasions. The first time was before the destruction of Jerusalem, and the second long after Jerusalem had been destroyed. The angel told John, and he said unto me, You must prophesy again before many peoples and nations and tongues and kings." Chapter 10, verse 11. That John was re-exiled under Emperor Domitian is consistent with the differing descriptions of circumstances attending each exile as given by the church fathers. Domitian commands that John drink a cup of poison, survives, and is exiled back to Ephesus, according to Arethusa. John published an expanded Greek version of the Apocalypse at Ephesus. In light of its renewed relevance during the Domitianic persecution, the encouragement of the book's message was now more broadly needed, and in the lingua franca of the Roman Empire, which was Greek. John's miraculous survival of both the trial of the boiling oil and the cup of poison led to yet another interpretation of Revelation 10:11. I quote, "Jesus said unto Peter, If I will that John tarry until I come, what is that to thee? Follow thou me. Then went this saying abroad among the brethren, that disciple should not die. John 21, verses 22 and 3. These verses, combined with Matthew 16:28, verily I say unto you, there be some standing here which shall not taste of death till they see the Son of Man coming in his kingdom, led to widespread belief that John would be kept alive in secret to the end of the age, to at last prophesy again. Revelation 10:11. Around AD 209, Tertullian documents this popular belief, quoting, Enoch no doubt was translated, and so was Elijah. Nor did they experience death. It was only postponed. They are reserved for the suffering of death, that by their blood they may extinguish Antichrist. And he cites Revelation 11:7. Even John underwent death, although concerning him there had prevailed an ungrounded expectation that he would remain alive until the coming of the Master. That's Tertullian. You can find that quote in Treatise on the Soul, 50. Introducing some of John's writing in his own work, Hilary of Poitiers wrote, quoting, Let John speak to us while he is waiting, just as he is, for the coming of the Lord. John, who was left behind and appointed to a destiny hidden in the counsel of Elohim, for he is not told that he shall not die, but only that he shall tarry. That's Hilary on the Trinity, 639. Not only did such reports persist, they flourished. According to Photius, even Ephraim of Antioch taught that John would join Enoch and Elijah at the end of the age in preaching against the Antichrist, as did Pseudo-Hippolytus, Pseudo-Methodius, Arethus, and Andreas, Theophylact, and Euthymius, and Simeon Metaphrastes in his Life of John, 7:2. Perhaps the most tenacious form of the tradition is in Russian Orthodoxy. Even today, some hearken to the 20th century catacomb, Elder Theodosius Kashin of Minvodi, when he said, quote, In the last times the apostle of love, that was what his disciples called John the theologian, will preach in the Caucasus. Anna Ilyanskaya writes, quote, A spiritual son of the elder Father Alexis Mikhev, Bishop Stefan Nikitin, was convinced that before the end of history the church would be ruled by the Apostle John, who is preserved in some unattainable place by the Lord for his last service, unquote. How could such stories be perpetuated if the place and time of John's death and entombment are so well known? Late apocryphal tradition, such as the journeyings of Philip the Apostle, reports continued evangelism by John and Philip well into the time of Trajan. Manuscripts of the Slavonic version of Pseudo-Prochorus, Wanderings of John, have him living until the age of Hadrian, that is, 117 to 138, and they incorporate large, otherwise lost portions of the Acts of John, which M.R. James, the scholar, placed around A.D. 150, within living memory of Hadrian. Whenever his entombment did occur, we still meet with the following tradition as late as Augustine, and I quote, Some assert that the Apostle John is still living and maintain that he is sleeping rather than lying dead in his tomb at Ephesus. Let him employ as an argument the current report that there the earth is in sensible commotion and presents a kind of heaving appearance, and assert whether it be steadfastly or obstinately that this is occasioned by John's breathing. That's Augustine, Tractate 124. Perhaps the most developed form of the tradition is in Russian Orthodoxy, as I mentioned before. Anna Ilyanskaya writes, quote, A spiritual son of the elder Father Alexis Mikhev, I've quoted this before, Bishop Stefan Nikitin was convinced that before the end of history, the church would be ruled by the Apostle John, who was preserved in some unattainable place by the Lord for his last service. Also, Russian Orthodoxy preserves the following tradition to this day. Quote, the Holy Apostle Philip, who baptized the servant of the Ethiopian queen Kandake, had 4 daughters, about whom the evangelist Luke remarks that they were prophetesses and virgins. Of them, Hermione and Eutychia set off for Asia, seeking the holy John the theologian, but did not find him, for the Lord had taken him, as once he took Enoch and Elijah. We find that in September, Lives of the Saints, 1902. Even today, some hearken to the 20th century catacomb elder Theodosius Kashin of Minvodi, when he said, quote, in the last times the apostle of love, as I quoted before, that was what his disciples called John the theologian, will preach in the Caucasus, unquote. Well, the enigma of the apostle John continues still, perhaps only to be resolved at the end of the age. We can pick up the trail of the roots of Christianity in the Caucasus. All right, let's do that. And here's the postscript. Considering these Jewish traditions about John bar Zebedee, we should not be surprised to read in the Talmud, as Christian Hebraist Capellus first pointed out in the 17th century, in his Spicelegium on Matthew 4:21, of Rabbi Yaakov bar Zebedee, James the son of Zebedee, or I would say Rav Yaakov bar Zavdai. In the Hippolytean Chronicle mentioned before, the 2 sons of Zebedee are described as rich young men of noble birth. Their father Zebedee, or Zavdai, was from Judea, a big ship owner employing numerous crafts on the Lake of Tiberias, one of the first citizens of Galilee. We're further told that the claim for them to sit on 2 thrones to the right and to the left of the Savior is raised by their mother, Salome, during a visit of Jesus to her house in Galilee. While the sons follow Jesus, their father Zebedee dies, his Galilean estate is sold, and the sons acquire in Jerusalem one of the houses of the high priest Caiaphas. If all this be true, how do we reconcile this with the common conception of the disciples based on Acts 4:13, quote, and when they saw the boldness of Peter and John and perceived that they were unlearned and ignorant men, they marveled, and they took knowledge of them that they had been with Jesus, unquote. Consider the intrinsic prejudice of the Sanhedrin. Quote, they answered and said unto him, art thou also of Galilee? Search, look, for out of Galilee ariseth no prophet. John 7:52. But their statement, as you already know, is palpably false. Jonah was of Gath Heper in Galilee, 2 Kings 14:25 and Joshua 19:13. The prophet Nahum was also a Galilean. In fact, Jerome states in the prologue to his commentary on Nahum that the village of Helkesai in Galilee was pointed out to him as Elkosh. Even Elijah arose out of Galilee, according to 1 Kings 17:1. Tishbe, being in the territory of Naphtali, is known from Tobit 1, verse 2. Acts 4:13 is not evidence of the character of the apostles, but of the bigotry of the Sanhedrin. Consider Mark 14:70, quote, and he denied it again. And a little later, they that stood by again said to Peter, surely thou art one of them, for thou art a Galilean, and thy speech agreeth thereto, unquote. These aristocrats of Jerusalem had a scornful contempt for the rural Galileans. Note that in the same context, John, the beloved, is not accused of this. John 18:15 and 16. This Judean prejudice against Galileans spilled over into the Gentile world. Christians en masse became known derisively as Galileans, no matter how well educated. Suidas, the great Byzantine lexicographer, noted that followers of Jesus were popularly known as Galileans before the name Christian became current. The Stoic philosopher Epictetus, writing about 101 AD, commented on the Christian penchant for martyrdom as the habit of the Galileans in his Discourses 4:7-6. Lucian described the overeducated Paul as a bald Galilean with a big nose. That's in Lucian, Philopatris 12. It was the only epithet that Julian the Apostate, who was an emperor, who was a nephew of Constantine, would use in reference to Christians. We find that the Galileans had a pronunciation considered, quote, very corrupt, unquote, by Judeans because they frequently interchanged alpha, eta, zeta, and epsilon. That's a, x, and e. We read in the Talmud, quote, the men of Judah who were careful of their language, their law was confirmed in their hands. The men of Galilee who were not careful of their language, their law was not confirmed in their hands. The men of Galilee who do not attend to language. Talmud Arubin 53. We find that We find that some of the more aristocratic disciples were prone to the very same prejudices. And Nathanael said unto him, Can there any good thing come out of Nazareth? Philip said unto him, Come and see, as if to say, just humor me, referring to John 1:46. Obviously, Nathanael and Philip, as we shall see, considered themselves of a higher class. Now, returning to Acts 4:13. Consider the forensic context and connotation of the terms used. Unlearned, angrammatoi. Lexically is, number one, a private person as opposed to a magistrate, ruler, or king. 2, a common soldier as opposed to a military officer. 3, a writer of prose as opposed to poetry. As for the term ignorant, kai idiote, Robertson Word Pictures notes, quote, old word. It does not mean ignorant, but a layman, a man not in office, a private person, a common soldier, and not an officer, a man not skilled in the schools, very much like angrammato, unquote. Note the Apostle Paul's usage of these terms regarding himself, quote, but though I be rude, idiote, in speech to a logo, yet not in knowledge, tein nose, 2 Corinthians 11:6. Here the star pupil of Rabban Gamaliel could speak of himself as idiote as regards to logo, that is the faculty of speech, skill, and practice in speaking, while still having gnosi, quote, the deeper, more perfect, and enlarged knowledge such as belongs to the more advanced, unquote. Cute little study. This same character is uniformly attributed to the early preachers of Christianity. 1 Corinthians 1:27, but God hath chosen the foolish things of the world to confound the wise, and God hath chosen the weak things of the world to confound the things which are mighty. And Matthew 11:25. At that time Jesus answered and said, I thank thee, O Father, Lord of heaven and earth, because thou hast hid these things from the wise and prudent, and hast revealed them unto babes. In context, we can now read Acts 4:13 anew. Now when they saw the boldness of Peter and John and perceived that they were unlearned, not ordained by a recognized body to a public office, and ignorant, not trained in public speaking, not poetic in speech, men, They marveled, and they took knowledge of them that they had been with Jesus. Unquote. Jesus as a rabbi, as a teacher. Those guys were autodidacts, like so many of us. Compare and contrast with this Paul's situation before Felix. Quote, and after 5 days, Ananias the high priest descended with the elders and with a certain orator, that is a rhetoro. We get the word rhetoric from that. The orator's name was Tertullus, who informed the governor against Paul. Acts 24:1. Rhetor means of a forensic orator or advocate, lawyer. The employment of a Roman lawyer, or in Latin, orator, was necessary since the Jews were not familiar with Roman legal procedure, and it was the custom in the provinces, according to Cicero. Imagine the consternation of the Sanhedrin at the fact that such unlearned and ignorant men with thick accents could defend themselves so powerfully and publicly. Still, how do we reconcile this view of a noble, rabbinic, even priestly family with the image of simple Galilean fishermen? We will recall that all the great rabbis were taught and practiced a trade. Rabbi Judah taught that, quote, he that teaches not his son a trade does the same as if he taught him to be a thief, unquote. Maimonides thought essential that, quote, the wise generally practice some of the arts, lest they should be dependent on the charity of others. It's in the tractate Talmud, Tors 1:9. Paul himself puts this principle into practice and maintained it during his apostleship, according to Acts 18:3 and 1 Thessalonians 2:9. Yes, even the priesthood, due to the cyclical nature of the work, were obliged to have outside enterprises. In the Talmud, we even read of the bazaars of the sons of Annas. That's bazaar, B-A-Z-A-A-R. Those guys had little shops just outside the temple where they sold stuff. The sons of Annas, he was the high priest. And he had 5 sons that were high priests, with the exception of Caiaphas, his son-in-law. Comparing John 19:25 with Matthew 28:56 and Mark 15:40, we identify 4 women designated by John. The Syriac Peshitta gives the reading, his mother and his mother's sister, and Mary of Cleophas, and Mary Magdalene. Salome was thus a sister of the Virgin Mary, and James bar Zebedee and John, the beloved disciple, were first cousins of Christ, and thus an offshoot of the royal Davidic line. This is one of the reasons Christ entrusted the care of his mother to the beloved disciple. John 19:26 and 27. While Jesus' brother James oversaw the Jerusalem assembly, and John's older brother James was evangelizing the diaspora in Spain, John faithfully cared for the Theotokos, the God-bearer, until her death in AD 48. Only then was John free to pursue the next phase of his ministry. And that is the formal end of the paper, with the exception of a plethora of notes. And in the notes, there's some good stories. What I really like about this was that all this other literature is quoted, mostly early literature that we never heard of.
You may contact us at Jackson Snyder Presents at this email address, veroyahad@gmail.com. That is veroyahad@gmail.com. And let me remind you, you are listening to Jackson Snyder Presents with your host tonight, Bogdan G. Schruumkoff. Thank you for listening. We'll be right back. Jackson Snyder Present is back. Join us now for more of this interesting discussion.
And in these notes, there are all kinds of other literature cited and quoted. Let's see if I can find one of these nice little stories. Here's one. Eleazar Chisma, about 100 AD, a profound mathematician, could count the drops in the ocean and declared that, quote, ability to compute the solstice and the calendar is the desert auxiliaries of wisdom. Among the sciences that Yochanan ben Zakkai, around 70 AD, mastered was a knowledge of the solstices and the calendar, that is, the ability to compute the course of the sun and the moon. Rabban Gamaliel included a chart illustrating the various phases of the moon and a sort of telescope for the calculation of airline distances. Here's an interesting note. Bar Ilan, a modern-day scholar, intimates that God, the seer, that is G-A-D, the seer, was directly influenced by John's revelation. And next, a cosmic hymn to the Creator in which all of creation, including the winds, clouds, all species of birds, mammals, and fish, sing praises for their very existence. It opens with the promise that those who recite it are assured of a place in the world to come, and ends with a hope that their study will be transformed into good deeds that will win heavenly reward. The praises are expressed in the form of scriptural quotations, reflecting the Jewish belief in the interdependence of study and prayer. This 10th century work also reflects an acute awareness of the spiritual dimension of nature and the environment. Now, here at the Yahad, that's one of the goals of our movement, the restoration and amelioration of all creation. Now, I'm going to have to look this hymn up, and wouldn't you know, it doesn't even tell in this footnote who wrote it or where to find it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to make it red in this text so I can go back and find out what that is, because that will fit perfect with our online Shabbat services, which I could advertise now. Come be with us at 11 a.m. Eastern Time, any Shabbat. We've got really good services. Professional, inspiring, anointed. Be with us on Zoom for Shabbat service if you don't have anywhere to go. www.theyahad.com. Zoom in. Pseudo Athanasius writes, the Gospel according to John was dictated by himself, the holy John the Apostle and Beloved, when he was banished to the island of Patmos, and published by him in Ephesus through Gaius the Beloved and host of the apostles, about whom Paul, too, writing to the Romans, said, Gaius, the host of me, and the entire assembly greet you. Pseudo Athanasius, Synopsis Scripturae Sacrae. All right, here's a real long note that deals with a couple important things, starting out with Eusebius and his ecclesiastical history, having to do with the flight to Pella. Quote, the whole body, however, of the assembly at Jerusalem, having been commanded by a divine revelation given to men of approved piety there before the war, removed from the city and dwelt at a certain town beyond the Jordan called Pella. Here those that believed in Messiah, having removed from Jerusalem, as if holy men had entirely abandoned the royal city itself and the whole land of Judea, the divine justice for their crimes against Messiah and his apostles finally overtook them, totally destroying the whole generation of these evildoers from the earth. Shlomo Pines wrote, if you don't know Shlomo Pines, you need to look his stuff up. He's found secret materials. The whole story that relates the flight of the original Christian community from Palestine has an evident counterpart in the departure of that community from Jerusalem to Pella, accounted in Eusebius and in Epiphanius. It is, moreover, an interesting point that Eusebius seems to say or to imply that this appeal was the indirect cause of the action resulting in the murder committed by the Jews of James, the brother of Jesus, who was the head of the Christian community in Jerusalem. Actually, this is me now, go to Josephus' last book in the Antiquities, I think, not sure. We have the murder of James, and then right after that we have talk about Paul and his gang of rioters. And Josephus does say that too, regarding the death of James. That was in 62 AD. The hypothesis can at least be envisaged that the attempts of some members of the Christian community in question to obtain help from the Romans or arrive at an understanding with them may, on the whole, have worsened the position of this community and finally rendered it untenable, making flight necessary. Oh, if they had to deal with the Romans and they were in Jerusalem at that time, with all those Sicarii, zealots for the Torah, assassins and murderers, they could not stay there. Our text seems to indicate that, as a result, Jewish Christian communities were formed in the Mosul district and in the Jazeera, or in Arabia. Moreover, here's a quote, "At that feast which we call Pentecost, as the priests were going by night into the inner court of the temple, they said that, in the first place, they felt a quaking and heard a sound as if a multitude saying, 'Let us remove hence.'" Of course, that's in Josephus' Wars. Just another proof to me that the better part of John's revelation came to pass in those 7 years between 66 and 73 AD. Tacitus tells us, or some people pronounce that Tacitus, that the doors of the shrine, Greek neon, it means, we're talking about the holy place or the Holy of Holies, were suddenly opened, and a voice greater than that of a human was heard to say that the gods were departing. Simultaneously, there was the unnatural movement of a departure. Next in these notes, we have the story of Thebeuthus, which is fairly new to me, but now, at this time, it was that one of the priests, the son of Thebeuthus, whose name was Jesus, Yahshua, upon his having security given him by the oath of Caesar, that he should be preserved upon condition that he should deliver to him certain of the precious things that had been reposited in the temple, came out of it, and delivered him from the wall of the holy house 2 candlesticks, like to those that lay in the holy house, with tables and cisterns and vials, all made of solid gold and very heavy. He also delivered to him the veils and the garments, with the precious stones, and a great number of other precious vessels that belonged to their sacred worship. The treasure of the temple also, whose name was Phinehas, was seized on, and showed Titus the coats and girdles of the priests, with a great quantity of purple and scarlet, which were there reposited for the uses of the veil. There's also a great deal of cinnamon and cassia, with a large quantity of other sweet spices, which used to be mixed together and offered as incense to Elohim every day. A great many other treasures were also delivered to him with the sacred ornaments of the temple, not a few, which things thus delivered to Titus obtained of him for this man the same pardon that he had allowed to such a deserted of their own accord, All right, this Thebeuthus, son, Jesus, Thebeuthus is the name a little earlier than that when James died in 62, he went up for the Mivakar, the bishop of the entire assembly of Yahweh, to take James' place. And he lost the election to Simeon bar Cleopas, the brother or cousin of Yeshua, and Tibeuthus was so angered at this that he not only left the movement, but he became apostate and an enemy of the Jesus movement. Tibeuthus. That's the one that I am just getting to learn about here. Here's a little more about, here he's called Tibeuthus. Hegesippus calls him Tibeuthus, while Josephus calls him Jesus, son of Tibeuthus, just as the gospel writers refer to Caiaphas, whom Josephus calls Yosef bar Caiapha, which translates as Joseph, son of Caiaphas, also known simply as Caiaphas in the New Testament, was the Roman-appointed Jewish high priest between 18 and 37 AD. It's a long time. In the Mishnah, Para 3 and 5 refers to him as Ha-Kof, the monkey, a play on his name for opposing Mishnat HaHasidim. The Babylonian Talmud, Yavamot 15, gives the family name as Kupai, while the Jerusalem Talmud, Yevamot 1:6, mentions Nekifi. In 1990, 2 miles south of present-day Jerusalem, 12 ossuaries, bone boxes, in the family tomb of Caiaphas were discovered. One ossuary was inscribed with the full name in Aramaic of Joseph, son of Caiaphas, and a second was simply the family name Caiaphas. That might be the daughter of the high priest that Paul came down from Tarsus with the idea of marrying. Of course, he didn't marry her, but that's another story. After examination, the bones of Caiaphas were reburied on the Mount of Olives. His bones should have been buried in Gehenna. Here's a little note about Corinthus. Polycarp told the story that John the Evangelist in particular is said to have so detested Corinthus, or Cerinthus, who was an apostate, of course, that he once fled a bathhouse when he found out Cerinthus was inside, yelling, "Let us flee, lest the building fall down, for Cerinthus, the enemy of truth, is inside." And we kind of forget the fact that John bar Zebedee was a man, that he could have been in the bath, and he could have been yelling at somebody, and that he had enemies. I think to us, he's more of an icon than a man. But there are some apocryphal histories of John as well, like the wanderings of John and the history of John. They come from a little later, but they really make John out to be a real person. And there's a very early text that has John housing at an inn, and the bed was so full of bed bugs that he couldn't sleep, and so he commanded those bed bugs to depart until he left the next day when they went marching back in. Clement of Alexandria informs us, for when on the tyrant's death he returned to Ephesus, speaking of John now, from the Isle of Patmos, he went away, being invited to the contiguous territories of the nations, here to appoint bishops, there to set in order the whole churches, assemblies, there to ordain such as were marked out by the Spirit. We might have already looked at that. That is recorded in the Apostolic Constitutions, which we are studying right now. Just a couple more. According to Lucius Dexter's Chronicle, quote, St. John the theologian wrote from Ephesus to the Spaniard Caius, the son of Caius Mellectanus, the centurion, and brother of Demetrius, a hospitable man, whose father was afterward Bishop of Milan. Now, Diotrephes hindered the guests who were coming into the Spains for the sake of pilgrimage. This wicked bishop was afterward deposed on account of his crimes and his pride. There was a pilgrimage from many other places to the holy places of Spain from the very times of the apostles, when Caius Oppius, the centurion, supported the pilgrims. This Caius was domiciled at Corinth, but of Spanish descent. He also liberally entertained in his house the Blessed Paul when he was returning from Spain, and he invited John when he was going reduntime, I don't know what that word means. When he was going into Spain after his exile, he accompanied John and was at Rome until the time of Hyginus, whoever that is. After that, he went to Milan, and being made bishop, there died in the Lord. And I am not sure whether they're talking about Caius or John. Just one more. The presentation of St. John holding a cup with a serpent coming out in Christian art illustrates the legend told by St. Isidore. When St. John was in Rome, an attempt was made to kill him. The poison was put in the sacramental cup, and when he took the cup, the poison came forth in the form of a serpent, while the assassin, hired by the Emperor Domitian, fell dead at his feet. Oh, that's enough of this. But this is part 2, and I enjoyed this paper very much. I hope you did too. If you want the full paper with the notes, I'll be glad to send it to you. Ask me at www.yahad.me. Ask me for the John paper, and I'll email it right back to you. I ask you to fill out my form because otherwise I don't know your email address, and I can't send anything to you. But don't worry, I'm not going to send you a bunch of junk in the mail or ask you for money. We don't do that here in the Yahad. Thank you for listening. You don't have any place to go on Shabbat to fulfill the commandment for a holy convocation? Come join us online every Shabbat at 11 o'clock a.m. Eastern Time. Download and install the client from Zoom.us. And when the time comes, just surf to www.theyahad.com. It's that easy. You can be anonymous if you want to. You're going to hear a great liturgy and an even greater sermon every week. Pretty soon you'll get to know the people that come, and you'll feel good knowing that you worshiped on Shabbat with other like-minded believers. You're invited. Download and install the Zoom meeting client from Zoom.us, and then surf to theyahad.com. See you there! You have been listening to Jackson Snyder Presents on Hebrew Nation Radio.